To start, just tell us your name and if you could spell it out as well.
Sure. My name is Douglas Miller. I'm Professor Douglas Miller, Douglasmiller. I'm an associate professor of history here at Oklahoma State University. I teach courses in Native American history, U.S. history, and U.S. history through popular and unpopular music. The title of my work submitted for this year's recognition is Washita Love Child, The Rise of Indigenous Rock Star, Jessie Ed Davis. I've been listening to Jessie Ed Davis my entire life. Sometimes I knew that, and other times I didn't. He produced a substantial body of work as a guitar player, a producer, a writer, a singer, an arranger, and so forth, from the late 1960s to the late 1980s, before he passed at an untimely age, at age 43 in 1988. His contributions to popular music run the gamut between jazz music and country music and pop music and rock and roll and beyond. And his name is all over my record collection that I've been cultivating and curating since second grade, quite seriously. So some of my earliest memories are of listening to music on which he performed. But because his body of work is so large, there were many occasions where I just didn't know I was listening to him. Fast forward to 2016, 2017, I was up one night listening to records at home, and I put on a Gene Clark album. Gene Clark was in the group The Byrds. And after he went solo, Jessie Ed Davis produced one of his albums. And I love this album with all my heart. It's a great wintertime album. It was probably winter. And I just kind of sat up in a moment and thought, why don't I know more about Jessie Ed Davis? His name's all over my record collection. And if we started pulling out albums, I could tell you something about most everyone in there. I could sort of give you an elaborate bio. Hence my relationship to collecting music. But I didn't know much about Jessie. And then I began to wonder why we, sort of collectively, the sort of music audiences and the American public didn't know more about this person. So then I became intrigued by the mystery. I gathered that he was important in his place and time. And I started to also gather that he was and is an important historical subject, not just in terms of his music artistry, but also in terms of Native American history. And I saw in him a certain intrigue that I wanted to pursue, and I realized that a research project on him might actually marry my lifelong commitment, devotion to music as really my first language with my scholarly research expertise in Native American history. That's exactly what happened. A life in music prepared me to write this book in a way that might have eluded most other authors. For example, I'm a guitar player too, right down to playing a Telecaster guitar, just like Jessie Ed Davis did. And when I entered into conversations with people who knew Jessie, his friends, his family, but especially his music collaborators, I could speak the language of music. I have experience in recording studios, experience as a touring musician, and so forth. So that was something that I didn't learn in the history discipline in graduate school or as an undergrad. That came from a life in music. And then my expertise in Native American history is particularly interested in the 20th century, especially the late 20th century. So as a scholar in my field, I've always been interested in some different sets of questions than those which typically drive our field. I'm interested in how Native people in the late 20th century recovered from legacies and histories of forced assimilation programs, marginalization within their own ancestral homelands, and so forth. And I could see Jessie Ed Davis as a historical subject and as a book subject from a couple of different angles that maybe made me somewhat unique as a researcher and a writer in terms of being able to bring the music into it and to bring my knowledge from the history discipline. I had to be creative in researching him. I had to make an archive before I could make the book. There are no Jesse Ed Davis manuscript collections anywhere in this country. You can't go to, UCLA and say, well, let me see the Jesse Ed Davis papers. There's no such thing. He was temporarily homeless in the 1980s. He didn't leave much of a paper trail. He didn't have many belongings. And I realized I had to make an archive through an oral history project in which I interviewed over 120 people, and through reading his music right down to the actual liner notes in a gatefold album and sort of seeing them as a map to understanding his life and his collaborations. So I depended on my academic knowledge, but also my personal experience in music, and sort of had them join forces and make this project possible, where many people initially thought it wouldn't be possible. But here we are. The only thing that I pulled from any kind of traditional library archive was a series of interviews that Jesse Ed Davis conducted from 1983 to 1987 on the subject of his close friend and music collaborator, John Lennon. Those are held at Columbia University in New York. And those really opened up the project for me in many respects, because if Jesse Ed Davis didn't leave a vast paper trail, there are not a lot of recorded interviews with him either. So I found a very valuable cache of interviews with him in his own voice, talking a lot about John Lennon, because that was the purposes of these interviews. But on occasion, the interviewer would ask him something more about his own background and his more personal experience. And that's where I kind of really sat up and leaned in and, heard some information I couldn't get from any other sources. But for the most part, the research materials for this project did not come from our typical libraries and archives. My previous research project, my first book, that was absolutely the case. This book was different in that respect, and it really challenged me as a scholar and a writer, and I embraced it. And I think that I gained a lot of valuable experience from it. The first book, sure, it was born out of my dissertation. My first book is about hundreds, thousands of indigenous peoples who, throughout the 20th century, moved to major cities for work, social, and education opportunities. And because my first book is sort of vast in its geographic scope and in its scale in terms of the human subjects, it wasn't easy to ever really attach my narrative to some particular stories that a reader could follow across chapters. I didn't really have a cast of main characters, so to speak. Now, my book about Jesse Ed Davis, Washita Lovechild, is, the complete inverse of that. Now it's principally about one particular person whom I sort of pursue through space and time and shifting contexts and so forth. There are, sort of secondary and tertiary characters in the book, but I could really dive deeply into one person's story. So I rallied around that as an opportunity to try my hand at a different approach to narrative as a historian. I could really focus more on the storytelling in particular, in a way that I couldn't in my previous work. And I really relished it. The stories are extraordinary. At the expense of this old cliche, the best writers in Hollywood couldn't have come up with Jesse Ed Davis's story. So it was surprising, and it was a real thrill to sort of put it all together in some fashion and share it with people. And finally, I wanted to, in particular, think about the sort of academic vernacular and the degree to which I wanted to deploy that or employ that in this particular project. I realized that with this subject, about a person I, very much insist was a rock star and played with John Lennon and Bob Dylan and George Harrison and so forth. I wanted to try my hand or even demonstrate that academic historians from my background can write in a sort of style and a tone for wider audiences. So I'm writing for a music audience in this book that likes to read biographies of compelling music figures. I'm writing for people who are interested in Native American history. This is a book that's about Los Angeles in many respects. It's a book that's even more so about Oklahoma in many respects. And finally, there's a sort of strong human interest component, I think, to Jesse's story. And I'm kind of playing to all those audiences at once in the book like we would in a concert, to sort of use an appropriate metaphor. And that was different with this book. Those things I couldn't do with my first book, or at least I didn't know how to do them. And I learned how with this project, and I really enjoyed it. Whatever I've worked on as a professional historian, I've always tried to be there where the story happened. I've written about indigenous peoples in Chicago, and I lived there. I've written about people in Dallas, and I lived there. Minneapolis, I lived there. Writing about Jesse, I spent a month living in Venice and Los Angeles to be there, to sort of smell and see the ocean and what the sunset looks like, and to walk those streets and to visit the old music clubs. And whatever I'm working on, I want to see it, I want to feel it, and I want to be part of the experience as a real person. And with Jesse, I had the sort of serendipity of, oh, he's also from Oklahoma. He was born in Norman. He was raised in Oklahoma City and went to high school there, and then he became a student at OU. This is an Oklahoma story, and he's a sort of architect of what we call the Tulsa sound in popular music. And here I am in Stillwater. I don't have to travel very far to get a sense of his place in time. Everything's right down the road. So in terms of Oklahoma as a principal setting within the book, Jesse's story tells us a different kind of Oklahoma history. It tells us a different kind of Native American history. Although Jesse's life ended in tragedy, I suggest in the book, his story ended in tragedy, I suggest in the book. His life was anything but. I think it's an empowering story. It's a very enriching story, and it's a beautiful story on many levels. And so I embraced the opportunity to write about a Native American person from Oklahoma who's sort of not characterized by trauma and pain and suffering and disenfranchisement and marginalization. This is a young Native kid from Oklahoma who had a dream to be a musician after hearing Elvis Presley. And he searched out those opportunities, and it worked. It worked. He made it to the top of the music business. He's an inspiration in that respect. And moreover, Jesse Davis, along with his cohorts like Leon Russell and J.J. Cale and other great musicians from Oklahoma, shows us a kind of countercultural history of Oklahoma that I think often doesn't rise to the surface in our popular memories of our great state. Jesse Ed Davis shows us that you can belong here on a different set of terms and in some different fashions. And that was really important for me to think about as a person who was in the process of making a home here in Oklahoma and even starting a family. This book I wrote about Jesse Ed Davis is a reflection of this advice. Be fearless, be courageous. I tell my students here at the undergraduate level, right within our freshman United States History survey, if you're going to take this class with me in day one, right? If you're going to take this class with me, you got to be fearless. You got to be courageous. Otherwise you're in the wrong class. Because we're going to go places here. We're going to go on some journeys, and we're going to see some wondrous and beautiful things, and we're going to see some painful and regrettable things, and we're going to see all of it. The way that we would love a person, love a family member or a child. You love it completely. You love the person completely. And I think of history that way. It should be a sort of complete love in our relationship to our shared and contested pasts. And so working on this book about Jesse, I had to be fearless. I mentioned earlier in our conversation that a lot of people told me at the front end when I would call people on the phone, just cold calling, can I talk to you about Jesse? Sometimes the first response is, Jesse Ed Davis? Yeah, well, that's a minefield. Are you sure you want to go there? You know you're not the first person who came along. Others have tried to make books about Jesse and films and so forth, and they could never get them off the ground. I was confronted in the early stages, in so many words, with a sense of, oh, this can't be done. The subject is too difficult. There's not enough material out there. I just didn't believe that. I didn't believe that, and I'm glad that I didn't believe that, because here I am 5 years later with the book in hand. And my message to young academics is, it's not profound. It's not some deep insight. I just come back to the good old-fashioned, do something that you can really put your heart and soul into, something that you can really feel and really believe in and really relate to as a historian, and be bold. Do the things that everyone tells you can't do, because you might prove them wrong. Well, for me, I don't think of it so much in professional terms. When I became a professional historian, it occurred to me, maybe even before then, maybe even as an advanced graduate student, it started to occur to me like, oh yeah, this is a business too, right? It's an academic pursuit. It's a scholarly endeavor, but what's a business? That's never been the part that really attracted me to this profession. I was a working musician for 15 years before I went to graduate school and really changed course in my life and devoted my future to Native American history. To some degree, I'm still interested in the artistry. I'm still looking for the next gig. And I've really projected that onto my career as a historian. So for me, it's important to work on projects of this nature. The book, I also co-curated an exhibit at the Bob Dylan Center with Joy Harjo. I co-produced an album. The book is now attached to a film project. I do all of these things as an extension of my life in music, where I want to create art. And to some degree, I think of history as an art. That's maybe what positions us more in the humanities than the social sciences. There's a real artistry to what we do. In some respects, I think I'm still making music, but now I'm just using a different language, the language of history, to achieve the same ends. So I work on these projects to fulfill that part of my life and my heart and soul. Now, they're necessary in terms of promotion and keeping my job and so forth, and I do them for those purposes too. But first and foremost, I like to make books because I liked to make albums, and they're very similar. I would encourage people to just look in every direction. Sort of don't foreclose different possibilities in terms of how we can present our research and share it with the public. So that includes museum exhibits and things of that nature, or making a music album, as I did, which I take seriously as a primary research project. I think that was a scholarly endeavor. It resulted in something fun, but that doesn't mean there wasn't a real scholarly mind behind it. I think that whether or not we need to be creative in how we, pursue opportunities to publish our work, I think we should always, nevertheless, be creative. It just is a matter of course. I think that academic historians tend to fall prey to the idea that we're only going to be able to reach this small audience with our relatively esoteric work. So much so that I try to remind graduate students that you don't have to sort of buy into this idea that the only people who are ever going to read your work are the 7 other experts in your particular field. There's nothing wrong with that. That's incredibly valuable work, and I've produced work like that myself. But you can believe that you can reach people in different ways, and sort of don't be bound to the sort of traditional ideas of where historians can and cannot belong. Yeah, well, my message, have fun with it. Isn't it a great thing that we get to do to to work on these projects and write about something that we think is important from our perspective and share it with the world, lean into it and enjoy being part of a community of other authors who are doing great work and feel like we're part of a larger experience and movement.